building and maintaining a best-in-class CMMS. Christian, take it away.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate it. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that's joining today. I really appreciate you spending the time with us. Today, we'll be working through building and maintaining a best-in-class CMMS system. Like Robin said, please feel free to put questions into the question area of the top of your screen. Would love to be able to get to those as we're actually going through the presentation, or if you'd prefer to have those at the end, we'll definitely make sure that we address those. All right. So let's go ahead and jump right in. A little bit about me. Like Robin said, my name is Christian Amland. I'm a senior solutions engineer here with eMate and Fluke Reliability now. I'm a graduate of Ave Maria University down here in Southwest Florida, where my wife and son and I live. So I've been down here for almost 15 years. It's actually right where our eMate office is. So some of you may have been down here for various trainings or events, or maybe you will be in the future. I've been married for over 8 years. We have a 1-year-old son named Jack. And on the more business side of things, I have been working in maintenance and reliability for almost 10 years, starting out in the Gartner world. So I was an account manager there, working specifically with the aerospace and defense industry. So very large manufacturing, very large operations, very important. So got to really know that side of the business through that experience. Prior to that, I actually helped run a golf course on the maintenance and reliability side as one of the greenskeepers. So been able to see things from really all sides here. And then now with my role at eMate and Fluke Reliability, I've been sort of the jack of all trades for the last 7 or so years, doing everything from implementing the software to supporting it, doing trainings, going on site to actually train other people on how to train their users. So done a little bit of everything, and hopefully I'll be able to use that experience today to show you some of the things that I have found are both effective and not effective for building and maintaining a great CMMS system. So let's take a look at what we're actually going to be discussing today. I'll spend a little bit of time going through the importance of implementing the right way. I do encourage you to check out our previous webinars. I have some wonderful colleagues that have presented on this topic in more detail. So shout out to Mike Mills, Jason Friedman, and Tara Acree. They have wonderful webinars on that topic. So again, I'll address it a little bit, but highly encourage you to go check those out. We'll spend the bulk of the presentation going through how to maintain a good CMMS system. A lot of people get into it. They do it the right way the first 4, 5, 6 months, and then things move into more of that shelfware where you just get frustrated or you've missed certain things, and so people don't end up using it. I want to help you to avoid that scenario today. And then we'll wrap up with how we can create a good vision for the future without overstretching, without overpromising, and under-delivering on that vision. So we're going to start things off with a nice, fun little poll question today. So Robin, I'm not sure if we need to launch anything specific in order for people to actually give responses. There will be a couple of questions today. My main goal with these is really just to get you thinking and to see some of the other answers that maybe other people will put into the chat or into the voting. So that way you can see you're not alone in wherever you fall within these different buckets. But the first question that we'll start with is, what is your biggest pain point in your day-to-day? So what keeps you up at night? What do you think about when you wake up in the morning? What are you dreading going to do the next day at work? And to help kind of facilitate that question a little bit better, does it involve something around people? Do you just have somebody who's a little bit difficult to work with or tough to get them to adopt different processes? Is it something regarding process, right? Do you not have a process for a certain scenario, or is it simply too complex or takes too much time? Does it have to do with technology, maybe the lack thereof or the use of too much, and it's actually bogging things down? Or does your main problem have to do with a little bit of everything, all of the above? So this is the question that we're really going to keep in mind as we go through the entire presentation today. This is our starting point. We want to identify the worst thing that's going on and branch out from there. By doing so, I've found that usually you sort of identify those other little issues along the way, but we always want to start with that end goal in mind. So this is what we're trying to solve with a good CMMS system. We want to be able to alleviate that pain, whether we have to be ready for different audits, whether those be internal or external audits, compliance testing, or you simply need to be able to make recommendations on repairing versus replacing certain equipment. This basic question is going to be our base for maintaining our good CMMS system.
And Christian, this is Robin. Do you see the poll running on your screen also?
I don't, but there we go. We've got it. All right. So looks like I have that question. Hopefully, oh, it looks like it paused my screen. That's okay. We'll go back to that. So looks like most of you have answered with the either top two there, so people or process, and that's very typical. So a lot of the times we'll see those two answers come in. We will be addressing how to help with those issues today. But again, high percentages on both of those, so you are not alone in your journey here. So let's start answering those questions. And what we're going to do first is we're going to start with how do we implement the right way so that we don't start off on the wrong foot? And there are kind of three buckets that you might find yourself in terms of your implementation and where you stand today. So you might fall into the, hey, we already have a system, but it's just not really doing what we thought or what we need it to do. So we need to answer the question of, is the system that you have already capable of doing what you need? And if that answer is yes, great. Maybe we just need to tweak a few things or maybe go through some retraining. We'll talk about that. Or if the answer is no, it's not capable of doing what we need, is it time for an overhaul? And sometimes that is the best approach. I've worked with customers all the way down to 3-person teams with just one building or one room in some cases. And I've worked with teams that have 80 different manufacturing sites globally, hundreds of different employees. And they all have that one thing in common, which is a lot of times they're trying to use a system that just isn't meeting their needs, but they're so invested in it, they've done so much with it that they just keep on trucking forward. A lot of times that is not the best approach because you're going to continue having process backups. You're continuing to have people that are frustrated with the way that you do things. So don't be afraid to say, you know what, it is time for an overhaul. Let's go ahead with a clean slate. The next bucket that you might find yourself in is, you know what, we don't actually have a CMMS system in place. We are looking to bring one on. My suggestion here is to never take the approach of we don't know what we don't know. Never go into a vendor meeting or a demonstration having no idea what you're about to see or what you need to see. Always come up with your list of requirements to accompany that selection process. If you're having trouble with coming up with that list of requirements, a very simple way you can do so is, what does your boss need to see? So not just what do you need to see with your team, right? Work completion, assets that are not becoming out of date or being worked on too much. Those are great things. That's a good starting point. But what does your boss need to see? What do they need to report up the chain? That's really going to drive or should drive your requirements for that CMMS. And the third bucket that you might find yourself in is, you know what, we have a good CMMS in place. It's actually working pretty well, but is it becoming Frankenstein? Do you have a bunch of bolt-on modules? Do you have full additional systems that you're using to fill gaps? And it's okay if you have to, integrate with an ERP system for corporate reasons, or just because it's going to do things a little bit more efficiently than a CMMS would, or making sure that you tie in sensors or tools, right? Those are good bolt-ons. Those aren't Frankenstein bolt-ons. We want to make sure that if that is something that you're doing, that's an effective way of working. We don't want to be drowning in people clicking around multiple screens, logging into different systems. That ends up with a lot of frustration and things being missed at the end of the day. So no matter what bucket you find yourself in with these three questions here, there's a couple of things that we can do to make sure that we are moving forward in the right way. And that is, any implementation meeting that you have, anyone that is going to be involved with and interacting with the system on any level, whether that's entering work orders out on the floor, whether that's creating reports for corporate meetings, doesn't matter what it is, have each person attend at least one implementation meeting. Now, some of you may be saying, hey, that's a little bit of a risky situation. We don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen. We don't want to bring everyone on in that way. And I would agree. Okay, so we have to have some stipulations here. Anyone that is joining, maybe make some rules in terms of, hey, this is not a meeting for you to jump in with suggestions or questions. Write those down. Have a chat that's on the side for them to ask you, so that you're not interrupting the flow of the implementation, but you are still getting the feedback that you need. Each person is going to have a different interpretation of what's going on. They're going to notice different things. We even see that on our side in developing new solutions. Every person that's on the development team is noticing a different thing that could be improved. Your CMMS and the way that you implement should follow those same guidelines. The next thing that you can do is make sure that you start with your end goal in mind. You are going to be sick of me saying that by the end of this presentation, but that is absolutely imperative no matter where you are on your journey. If you do not have an end goal in mind, then you're just going to be running on an endless treadmill. And for anyone that runs on a treadmill, you do not want to have to be on that for any longer than you intend to. You want to be able to get off that. So we don't want to end up on that endless treadmill. We want to make sure that we're moving forward with a goal in mind. And then the third thing is there are always going to be those additions that you need to make, things that you can do to improve your system. Just make sure that they are actually going to help you and you're not just checking boxes. That's another theme that we're going to see a lot today is we don't want to ever be a team that just checks boxes. That doesn't do anyone any good. There's no real driver behind it. Eventually those boxes just go unchecked. All right. So that's all I'll say on the implementation portion. Again, for a little bit more guidance on that, please review our previous webinars. We're now going to dive right into more of the bulk of today's presentation, which is maintaining a good CMMS system. So we're going to actually have a second question here, and I'll be very curious to see everyone's answers. This is one of my favorites to go through. And that question is, how many of you could right now produce a record of all of last year's work orders for one particular asset of your choosing, and how long would that take you? Okay, I'll give you a couple of prompts here in a second, but just keep in mind, asset is a very ambiguous term for today's uses. If you're a facilities manager, these could be the buildings themselves, people's offices, HVAC units, pumps, compressors. If you're in manufacturing, this could be process lines, this could be custom machinery, this could be forklifts. If you're in fleet management, this could be vehicles. So anything that you are responsible for, if I'm an auditor and I come in and say, show me everything you've done for the last year, could you do it and how long would it take? Okay. So are you in the bucket of, yes, I can, it's going to take me less than 5 minutes, not a problem? Are you in the bucket of, you bet, but it's going to take me a little while, so give me a couple of minutes to figure that out? No, I don't, but I do have that data somewhere, so I'm going to go back and give me a week or so, I'll put something together for you. Or the dreaded final option, absolutely not going to happen, Chief. Do not have those answers for you. That's when you get slapped with those fines. That's when you have production loss over abundance of downtime. So that last one is really what we want to avoid here. We want to be in that top bracket of, yes, I can, less than 5 minutes. And because I'm curious, I do want to go see what we have for the poll here. So looks like, let me see if I can see the poll itself. That's all right. It looks like it went away. So either way, this is the question that we're trying to answer. This is our goal of having a CMMS system. We want to make sure that we're able to answer those questions. So how do we actually do that? Well, today I'm going to present you with what I call the 3 keys to maintaining your CMMS. I'm stealing a little bit from our 10 keys for CMMS success that we have here. It's a workshop that we provide. So a little bit of paraphrasing, but different concepts that we're going to be presenting today. So our first key to maintaining your CMMS success is, if my slide will advance here, data hygiene. So what does that actually mean? Right? First off, it means that data cleanliness is king. So there are 3 A's that I'm going to go through to ensure that your data is actually clean, that it is actually usable. Right? This image here, you can see there's a lot going on, a lot to do, but depending on what you're tracking, that could be an effective way of managing things. So in order to make sure that we have the right data for what we're trying to do, the first thing we need to do is go through annual data reviews. Again, I've worked with large and small teams alike, and this is something that every single one of those teams that works effectively does. And notice I didn't say biannual, I didn't say quarterly, I didn't say monthly, I said annual data reviews. It just needs to happen once a year. It's kind of like a family reunion. You go to a family reunion, everyone loves going there once a year, but by the end of it, you're ready to be done. We don't need to be doing this more than once a year, okay? So what this entails is, if you'd like, you can even use your CMMS to set up something like a recurring schedule. Have it send you an email and say, hey, you need to do your annual data review. So go through, make sure that, one, you're actually getting the data that you need. Right? Having manufacturer, model number, serial number, install date, purchase cost, those are all good things. But if they're not doing anything for you, then we need to make sure that we're addressing what is going to do things for you, what's going to drive the business forward. So make sure you're getting the data that you need, make sure it's the right data, you're tracking what you actually are responsible for, and that anything extraneous is eliminated from your process. The biggest pitfall that I have seen over the years is people trying to be too detailed simply for the sake of being detailed, and that immediately frustrates anyone that's actually out on the floor having to use the system. They're spending 10 minutes entering things that have no bearing on what is actually getting presented or being used to move the business. So that's A number one, annual data reviews. A number two is access rights. Now, you might think that this is just, hey, make sure that everyone has the right access. And you'd be correct. That is the first part of it. But this leads to a lot of other issues that I've seen over the years, which are, you have somebody who's responsible for keeping track of, we'll use downtime as a very common example, or how long it took them to do a job just in more general of a sense. Right? But if they don't have a start or stop timer that they can use to track that, if they don't have a place to put those hours in, where it takes them 6 different screens to do so, then they're probably not going to put that information in, or it sounds like they don't have the ability to do so. So sometimes it's as simple as saying, hey, we need to check a box here to make sure that they have the ability to put that information in. Why are we not getting our downtime or our time log tracked? Well, it's because the person responsible doesn't actually have the ability to do it. So we need to review those access rights, make sure that people are actually focusing on the things that they need to focus on, and that they're not getting pushed into areas that are confusing or have too many screens. And the third and final A is making sure that we have accurate data entry requirements. One of the biggest things that I have seen is you go into a scenario where people say, okay, it's taking people 10 minutes to enter a work order because we have 17 different required fields. I say, okay, well then if your CMMS allows you to have multiple ways of entry, maybe certain work orders require certain things and others require others, great, let's use that to our advantage, make sure that we're not taking 10 minutes to put in a simple corrective work order. However, the flip side of that coin is if we do have all of those requirements, there's probably a reason for it. So we want to make sure that we're not just avoiding pain now to end up with pain later. We want to make sure that we're not having pain at all. Right? So yes, maybe it takes a little bit longer to enter information, but then for that person who's actually entering that and is maybe frustrated with having to do so, you can say, look, either I'm going to end up having questions for you down the road and we're going to spend an hour and a half off the floor with you not being able to do your job trying to figure those answers out, or we can go about it in this way where you're actually entering the information right now. I don't end up coming to you with questions and everyone is able to move forward. So whatever those data requirements are, whatever those data entry requirements are for you, know that you have those requirements for a reason. And if you're looking at something and going, you know what, we really don't have a reason for this to be a required field or a required thing that we need to do, then take it out, right? Don't be afraid to change processes. I'm a big proponent of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of principle. But sometimes things do need to be removed or changed in order to facilitate that natural flow of a process. So don't avoid pain now just to get pain later. We want to make sure that we're using that. And all of this to say, a lot of this data can also be pulled out usually in various reports and dashboards. We see those used a lot for external facing information, right? We're reporting to corporate or reporting to customers or consumers, but you can use that information to your advantage internally as well. Make sure that people are actually reviewing when things have been updated or when information has been put in. Create a report for that. When was this record last updated? Make sure that if you have required fields that absolutely need to be filled out, that you have a report that shows that as a column of data so you can see that it is being filled out in the way that you need, or highlight things that haven't been completed correctly. Right? The last thing that we want to do is end up failing an audit or have an issue where we don't know what happened or what was done to fix it previously. So data hygiene, data cleanliness is really at the top of this. And there's a common phrase that you hear when you are speaking on this type of a topic. And today I'd like to amend that a little bit. And that phrase is good data in equals good data out. So this is specific to CMMS in today's presentation, but we hear this a lot in general, right? Make sure you have good data. Well, good data could look like having 50 different things that you're tracking all at the same time, and that could be considered good because you have everything that you need and it's all in one place. But again, if that's not going to be helpful to you, then entering all of that good data isn't going to move you forward. So I would amend this statement to simply be, instead of good data in, good data out, it should be right data in, right data out. So make sure that you are tracking the right things, not just that you are tracking everything. The spray and pray approach very rarely works, especially in larger organizations. You can get away with it a little bit on the smaller organizational side, but you will eventually run into those issues. So right data in, right data out, not just good data in, good data out. So that's our first key to maintaining a good CMMS is data hygiene. The next one that we'll be discussing, my favorite, is organizational responsibility. Now, that sounds very fancy in the first sense of looking at that, but it's really very simple. All we're trying to do is avoid the what I like to call the admin on an island phenomenon. Right? This is a great movie. It is a terrible way to maintain a CMMS system. You do not want to be the only person who knows how to use the system. You do not want to be the only person who knows how to train people on it. And there's a very simple reason for that. If you leave or you're sick for 2 weeks, everyone else is hung out to dry. Nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows who to go to for questions. So we really, really want to avoid this scenario. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have one central admin. I've seen that be very effective, especially for larger organizations. So that way you have one point of contact for user management, for questions that maybe a support team isn't able to answer, or just to have a quicker line of being able to move things forward. So I'm not saying that you can't have that one central admin. I think that's a good thing, but you shouldn't be out on your own island. There should always be somebody who is able to take over the reins if you go on vacation or move organizations, right? These things happen. These are real life scenarios. So we need to be prepared for those. We don't want just a bunch of tribal knowledge going from one person to another. We need to have multiple people involved. So one of the ways that we can avoid having that admin on an island is to make sure that, again, everyone who is touching the software at all is involved with and is responsible for their part of the process. So this is less technology based. This is more conversational, right? So if you go to a technician level user and they say, I hate entering this data. It takes me too long, or I don't understand how this works. Well, then we need to make sure that they understand how what they are doing leads into the greater chain of events. Right? If they complete all of their procedures on time, if they're showing that it is maybe taking them 4 more hours than it should to complete a certain job, well, now, if I'm the manager, I have the ability to go and say, hey, we need more resources. We need someone to help you. So by you helping me, I am able to help you. So it's not just about, I want you to do this because we have to, because corporate told us to do so. It's, look, I want to be able to make your life easier. If your biggest problem of the day is, I don't have enough resources, well, let's make sure that we're able to identify that we need more resources, that we can show the proof that we need that so we can bring those people on. Or if you say, hey, this takes too long. All right, well, how long does it take you? And you say, anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. Again, you need to be able to show that evidence. So everything all the way down to the lowest person on the totem pole, all the way back up, that everyone needs to be able to understand what they are doing and how they are contributing to the business. I have found that over the years, that really helps people to also be motivated to do a better job, to really be involved, because they then can say, okay, it's not just me coming in, clocking out, doing what I need to do. All right, this is actually going to help me maybe get a raise at the end of the year. If I can show that we've cut production time in half, right? That's obviously going to be good for everyone. So all of those little pieces are going to lead into a more happy and well-functioning organization. So this really needs to be something where you're able to speak with those employees at all levels and help them to understand what their role is doing for the greater business. All right. And the last thing that we want to do is make sure that this person who's kind of that admin on an island, if you do have or are in that situation, we don't want to end up with more of a tattletale system instead of a CMMS. That's something that I see a lot when this happens, where one person's responsible, they're feeling overwhelmed. Then they just start putting in place all sorts of different blockers or weird requirements to make sure that everyone's doing their job, and kind of beating you over the head with a stick right behind you while you're trying to do your job. We don't want that. So this is what that results in. So again, operational responsibility, we want everyone involved. We want everyone to know what they need to do. All right. And the third and final key to maintaining a good CMMS system, a best-in-class system, is continuous learning. So we're going to take this from a couple of different sides, one from initial training and then discuss a little bit more on the continuous side. And before we go into this, I'll give you one final question to consider today. And that is, how many of you have technicians or just users in general, it doesn't have to be technicians, that would prefer not to use technology to log their work? Could be any reason, right? It takes too long. I like using paper and pencil. We've never tracked anything. Why are we doing it now? Doesn't matter what the answer is, but a couple of things to kind of get you going. No, it's not really a problem. Everyone that we have is very tech savvy. If you are in this bucket, congratulations. That is amazing. We do not hear that very often. That's very rare. But if you are, great. Then that's something that we can move forward. That's okay. Maybe you just have a few people that have a little bit of issue as far as technology is concerned. We can work with that. Maybe you have a completely out in left field scenario, and this is something that I saw in my earlier career with Gartner, with the aerospace and defense industry at that time. They were not allowed to use certain technology out on the floor in their environment, so we had to make sure that they had ways of working with things and ensuring data entry was done outside of that floor. So that brings in conversations like, okay, let's make sure we're building in time for that. We don't want to just say, hey, it's 5 o'clock, but you have an hour of notes left to do. That's too bad. You're just going to have to stay and do them. That's a completely separate thing that we need to address. So just, again, something to keep in mind. Or maybe this is a huge problem for you, and that's where we need to really start. So again, wherever your starting point is, there are different solutions for each point.
And Christian, since I know that the poll is not showing for you,
Yeah.
27% of the responses said this is a huge problem for us.
Okay, very good. So then again, you know that you're not alone. Over a quarter of the people that are in this room right now all have an issue that involves not being able to, or people not wanting to use technology. So I think the previous couple of slides where we talked about being able to have those conversations, help people to understand why this is important, not just a hey, you have to do this because I said so, right? We want to make sure that those things are happening, and that's going to be the first step in addressing that process. Now, the second step and the most important is making sure that we are not doing these things when we go through different training. A lot of times people have issues with using technology simply because they don't like going through the training where they were not trained effectively. So we don't want to end up with something that looks like this. You're sitting at a long conference table, you have somebody up there that's presenting and they're just going through screens saying, oh, does this look good to everyone? Does anyone have any questions? Of course, nobody has any questions. Nobody wants to take this any longer than it needs to. Nobody wants to ask any questions that maybe they think are dumb questions. By the way, there are never any dumb questions, right? So it's a difficult way to present the information. I'll give you a little anecdotal story here. So several years ago, I went up to a large tire manufacturer up in the Midwest for a 4-day on-site training. They had a little bit of a short staffing issue that week, so we were already starting off on an interesting foot there. But I asked them, being the young trainer that I was, I said, how do you want to do this? Are you just going to pull everyone off the floor? Are we going to do it in groups? How do you want to go about it? And they said, okay, well, we're going to do 3 or 4 people at a time. They're just going to come in. We'll do an hour at a time, and then they have to go right back to it. So just show them what you need to show them, and then we'll continue on with the day. As you can imagine, 3 months later, we were back out there with a completely different training approach because nobody had learned anything, right? Everyone came in, their mind's still on everything that they were just working on, the things that they need to go right back to. So no one's really paying attention, and you have a lot of people that look like the people in this image here where just arms are crossed, texting under their table, not really getting anything out of it, right? So that's another thing that you can do if you are sort of forced into that approach. Again, I'm going to give you some better ways to do it, but if that's your only option, at least make sure that you're not just asking for questions. Try and think of what those questions might be, anticipate that, so that way you're offering those as topics of discussion rather than just saying, okay, anyone have questions, and waiting for the Bueller moment in the room. We don't want to have that. The other thing that's going to kill any good training is only pulling people that are available at the time. Right? One thing I've really been harping on is making sure that everyone is involved with every aspect of the CMMS that they need to be. So only pulling some people that are going to be using it isn't going to end up giving you the training and the work that you need to be done. So everyone works differently. Every team structure is different. Every production schedule is different. Everyone has different shifts. Some people don't do shift work. So you know what's best for your team. I'm not trying to dictate that, but I am saying that no matter what you do, you need to make sure that you have everyone involved. It shouldn't just be, hey, this person has an hour break, they'll come in for a second. And the last thing that you want to make sure that you avoid, and this is probably the biggest one, don't sit there and work for 2 or 3 hours at a time with 1 or 2 breaks in the day. Everyone ends up very brain dead by the end of the day. You're not able to retain anything. 4 days after that 4-day training, you're not going to remember anything, and you're going to end up just right back in that position that we saw happen in real time. So those are things you don't want to do. So what do we need to do then in order to have an effective training and in order to facilitate continuous learning? Well, we want to have something that looks a little bit more like this. Everyone is hands-on, everyone is involved. Not a single person is looking over anyone's shoulder. Everyone is involved with that process. Okay? So my suggestion, and something I've seen be effective for various teams across the board, is work for 30 minutes in a room, in that conference room, in that classroom, and then immediately go out either onto the floor or into an area where you can safely have a mock-up of a certain scenario and work with everybody in that manner. Right? Make everyone work through an example. If you have a tablet with your CMMS on it and you're showing them how to go through the steps of a work order, it should not be me showing you, handing it to the next guy, he's kind of doing it, handing it to the next person, handing it to the next person. Every single person needs to be able to have it in their hand, look at the trainer, go through the process and say, I have a question here. Why do we do it this way? Or it looks like we're missing this. So make sure that you have that individualized approach. And sometimes that's difficult to do with larger groups. So something that I've found to be very effective to help with that is that train the trainer approach. Right? So over a 4-day training, that's 32 hours of training. If you spend just 10 to 15 minutes with one individual person and you're going through on their actual daily inspection route, for example, you have to have a lot of people in order to get up to that 32-hour mark. And even if you exceed it, you're still going to have a more effective training. People are actually going to remember what's done because they had to be hands-on. So that's a key for you there. And then always make sure that you're customizing that training schedule to allow for critical work to still be done. So even if you do all those things right, you're eliminating, a lot of time in the classroom, making it more hands-on, making it more effective in that way. People are still going to be distracted if you're pulling them out during peak hours or during a time that there's some sort of a fire drill or they have an issue that they need to handle. So this is where, you know your team best. Make sure that you are handling these scenarios in the right way. So just something to keep in mind for you there. If you have to, maybe start earlier in the day, or maybe we want to do something at a non-peak time during the year, right? Make sure that we're keeping those things in mind when we go to do any sort of training. And then again, this should be an annual thing, not a biannual thing, not every week, not every quarter, just once a year. Have a quick refresher and say, hey, let's go through our current process. Is anyone having any issues? I noticed this the other day. Get the conversation going. Don't just wait for feedback. So make this an annual thing. It doesn't have to be as crazy and as involved those second or third times that you do it versus the first time. Just make sure that you are continuing to go through, because you're going to have new employees. You're going to have people in new roles. You're going to have teams shift around, new products. So always make sure that you are continuing to train and learn how your process needs to evolve with your business. Right. So if we do all of those things, we have good data hygiene, we have operational responsibility, we're making sure we have good continuous learning practices, then we'll be able to actually design an effective vision for the future. So it's a nice image here, right? It makes you think that you have the whole world at your fingertips, everything is going well. Well, again, we want to make sure that that vision for the future is not something that we are going to overpromise on and underdeliver. So one of the biggest pitfalls that I see in any organization that I've walked into is, you go in, you meet maybe the maintenance manager, and they walk by their shop area and they have a big TV screen with a giant dashboard of all their metrics. They point at it and they go, oh, pretty cool, huh? I've always said, yeah, it looks great. I mean, you clearly are tracking a lot of stuff. But why are you tracking this, this, and this? There's maybe 15, 20 reports. Looks something like this. They say, oh, well, this one helps us make sure that we're not accumulating too much downtime. This one shows us when we need to replace machines. This one is taking track of our meter readings. And I say, okay, great. That's 4 or 5 of them. What about the other ones? And a lot of times they don't have an answer, right? They just want to make sure that if somebody comes walking by, it looks like they're doing a lot, right? It looks like they're very busy. And I'm sure, they always are very busy, but they really want it to look like that at first glance. Avoid that at all costs. We do not want metrics just for the sake of metrics. So in order to avoid that, we need to make sure that, again, we are understanding what we need to deliver as far up the chain as possible. What you don't want to do is go to your boss and say, hey, what do you expect from me this year? What are you looking for? Because they're going to go, you should probably know what I expect from you. You need to know how to manage your team. Don't do that, right? We don't want to have any awkward conversations. We don't want anyone thinking that you don't know how to do your job. So instead, the approach should be more like, hey, what do you need to be able to deliver at the end of the year? What do you need to report to the shareholders? What do you need to report at the directors meeting? So that way they can say, hey, I actually take everything that you do and I turn it into this. So that way you can identify any gaps in that process. Okay, if you're trying to do this, I actually have a better way to give you that information so you're not having to do a bunch of other manipulation to get that number. I can do it this way and then provide it to you. That makes you look good. That makes your team look good. Everybody is able to continue on and do things more quickly. Right? So again, all leads back to making sure that everyone is involved, making sure everyone feels responsible. So the biggest and best way to make sure that you have the right metrics in place is there some sort of cost associated to it. Right? Not everything works that way, but it's a very easy way to say, okay, this is something that actually helps us or it doesn't. And that cost could be positive, right? Making you more money, or it could be negative, saving you money. So if, for example, you say, you know what, we really need to track mean time to repair. How long is it taking for our techs to do things? Well, if it doesn't really matter and you have a week window to complete something, or you only do things during shutdown periods, so taking a little bit longer to do something isn't really costing or losing you money or anything like that, then it's really not an effective metric and it's really not something you need to be worried about. Now, if you come to me, and this is a real life scenario that we've dealt with, and say, hey, every 5 minutes of downtime that we experience, we lose $50,000. Well, now you've got yourself a good metric. That's absolutely something you can tie cost to, a very specific number to. You absolutely need to track that. Another example that we saw was there was a report that showed how many work orders each person had completed by the end of the week, and they made it sort of a competition. That's great. Really get people motivated, try and get people to do things quickly. But what you don't see with that report is how many hours it's taking for each of those work orders. Maybe Joe over here's only completed 5 work orders, but they took him 3-4 hours each. Whereas Bob completed 20, but it took him 20 minutes each. So that's not necessarily an effective metric to say, hey, we are load balancing across the team. Well, everyone seems to be kind of leveled out there. Well, you need to look a little bit further into that and say, actually, Joe's working 50-hour weeks and Frank is only working 30-hour weeks. So now we have our effective metric. We had a good starting point, but it didn't get us where we needed to be. We asked the questions. Now we get into that granular level so that we can actually answer the question at hand, which is, are we overloading people too much? So those are just some examples of different metrics that we've seen over the years. Again, avoid the massive dashboard with 15 things on it. If you have 15 things to track, great. But if I ask you about it, you better be able to articulate every single reason why those things are being tracked. Because otherwise you end up back in that landslide of people getting frustrated because they're having to enter things that don't matter. People missing things because you're not tracking the right information. Questions getting asked that there are no answers to. So if you're able to create effective reports and dashboards that link back to the business, that link back to your costs and your revenue, then everybody wins. Right? Had to throw this one in there. It's my favorite image from back a couple of years ago when it really started making a resurgence there. But if you're able to do all of the things that we've discussed today, no matter where you're starting, then you're going to have a team where everyone is able to win. And with that, I will open up the floor for any questions that we might have. And again, I'll thank everyone for taking the time with us today so far. And I'll actually take a look at some of the questions that we have in our chat here. Let's see. All right. Yes, so this is a perfect statement. So organizational responsibility refers to an organization's obligation to consider the impact of its decisions and activities on society and the environment beyond its financial performance. It involves taking actions and implementing policies that address the expectations of various stakeholders and contribute to sustainable development. This encompasses ethical behavior, compliance with laws, integrating responsible practices. Yes, absolutely agree with that statement. That is a great way to think about it. It's not just about your silo that you live in on a daily basis. So that's a great way to put that. Another question that we have is, can you give practical examples of data cleanliness? Yes. So a good way to check if you have clean data is if, let's say, you have to export everything, right? You have to change systems or you have a new process that's in place, so you have to alter some things, re-import data. Are you able to simply say, yep, let me go ahead and export this one time? Or are you going in 6 different directions trying to find information? So that's one of the ways to see good examples of data cleanliness. And the other way that I've seen most people do it is just making sure that you have the right information. Right? It doesn't have to be complicated, but one of the things that we do with our CMMS, for example, is use a lot of drop-down lists. So instead of having, let's say, we'll use work order type as a common example. You have 7 different spellings of corrective because people are typing in, this is a corrective work order, versus just selecting, this is a corrective work order. So that's another way that you can tell if you have either not the right data or just bad data in general. You have a lot of typos, you have a lot of duplicate data entry. So if you can check for incorrect, duplicate, or non-exportable data, those are going to be 3 things that'll really help with identifying some key ways to go about your data cleanliness and data hygiene initiatives. Right. Another question was, what are your recommendations for spare parts management and assessment? Excellent question. So if that is something that you're responsible for in terms of tracking what's used for each work order, if you have warranties that you need to be aware of, things that you can send back to different vendors, then what I would say is make sure that you have those as some of your key reports and metrics, right? Because you have to be able to illustrate at the end of the year, this is how much we spent on parts, this is how much we spent with this vendor versus that vendor. Maybe we need to consider a different vendor because we're spending too much money. So that's where I would start with that. And then as you get down that road, the cycle counting aspect of things is really going to be helpful for you as well. That can be, for compliance reasons, making sure people aren't stealing parts, or it can just be to make sure that whatever numbers you're actually delivering, this is what we purchased, this is what we received, are in fact accurate. So start at the level of making sure that you have the ability to track what you need to track, that you have reports that are showing that at the end of the day, and then making sure that you actually review what is in your spare parts list, what's in the cage right now. I've seen too many times where people will just continue to order parts that are commonly used simply because they can't find things after they've ordered them. So they just order it again, use it, and then 2 weeks down the road, they go to the store and go, oh, we have 50 of these. We just spent $500. We could have used all of these. Now these are out of warranty. Now we have to call somebody. So being on top of what you actually have is just as important as making sure you have the right process in place to show them what you're using. Right. And it looks like we've got a couple of other questions here. This is a great one. So how does AI get incorporated into existing CMMS systems? So there's a lot of different CMMS systems out there. Some of them are able to use AI in a very effective way. Others are just kind of throwing around as it's sort of the big buzzword for the day. Another example of that is when I was at Gartner. This is almost 10 years ago now. The big buzzword was IIoT, so Industrial Internet of Things. It was when sensors and tools that you could put on systems was becoming more the norm. So make sure that you're not using that as a buzzword is the most important thing I think I can say there. It doesn't matter how many AI-based features there are. If it's not something that's actually helpful to you in speeding up a process, maybe it could be a distraction even. People are messing around with the AI assistant versus just going through the process that you've laid out. So I would say it's a good thing. It's a good tool to use to incorporate into a CMMS system, but make sure that it's not causing you more problems than it's eliminating. That would be the key thing there. And then also security wise, right? Make sure that if it's a third party system that's integrating AI, or if it's the CMMS in general, what are they doing with that data? Is it being shared? Is it going into a data lake? How is that data lake used? So those are all of those types of questions that you need to consider in terms of AI specifically. Great tool. I use it every day to help me with complex coding and formulas and things. So, I'm not saying not to use it, but I am saying to make sure that you are using it effectively, just like every other part of today's presentation. Right. Let's see here. Any suggestions on starting a maintenance department or program with just a few people? There are 1.5 people in my maintenance organization, so not the first time I've heard that one before. The best way to do it is really just to make sure that we define different roles first, right? So if you have 1.5 people, what is the half person, or what's the other person able to do? What are they responsible for? So if you have a small team, sometimes what I see is, one person is doing 80% of the work and the other person is just kind of picking up the slack because that person isn't able to finish things. Terrible way to go about it. Just split it right down the middle. Should be 50-50 unless there are, blockers in place, like this person can't do this because they don't have that title, or they shouldn't have access to that data. That's a different story. But you should always be able to split up that work evenly. There should never be we only hired this person because this guy has 20% work that he can't do. So if you have a couple of people, make sure that you are using them effectively in that way. Define those roles. This is a good one too. How frequently would you recommend retraining technicians? What's an effective way to notify non-admins of new features or procedural changes? Good one. So I think at least once a year. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Like I said, it could be just 10-15 minutes running through things, making sure you're not missing anything. And that's also a good way to highlight any new features that are within the application that you're using, or new processes that you've put in place. So just to make sure that everyone's aware of that. It's very easy to get in a groove. You know what you need to do every single day, but there's a feature out there that can help you and you just aren't aware of it. So that retraining on an annual basis is usually plenty. Typically speaking, there aren't more than a couple of very groundbreaking updates that you might see within a CMMS over a given year period of time. It's just how software works. So yearly is usually more than enough. All right. Okay. Yeah, so is there any CMMS software that is existing in the market that will take the voice recording of the maintenance worker and convert it to words? So I'm assuming just speech to text there. Yes, there are plenty of options out there that allow for that. A lot of times that's a device specific question. So, pretty much anything that was made after 2015 has voice recognition or voice capabilities. So yes, that's always a good way to do it. If you have people that have gloves on their hands, grease on their hands, things that make it hard to use a phone or tablet, speech to text is a great feature to have. So know that going into those requirements discussions. Say, hey, do you have this feature? If that's very important to you. All right, let's see. We've got a couple other questions here. One that just came in, do we have a short self-audit process regarding CMMS? Yeah, I think the best way to do this is that one question that I asked, which is if someone were to come into your office right now, can you pick any asset? And it can't be the one that you work on all the time. It has to be one at the bottom of the list. Can you pick that and show what's actually being done? Everything from how many work orders you've done to when they were completed, who they were completed by, what costs were associated. Were there failures that you noticed? Are you tracking those failures? So you can go down that road very easily with that one simple question of someone comes in, they want to see what you've done there. Can you answer it or not? That is a good self-audit assessment. As you're able to answer that question more easily, then you get into those more detailed topics. So that's a good starting point for you. Obviously, everyone's going to be a little bit different, but I think that scenario is a good way to start and something that a lot of our customers use as well. All right. This is a good one as well. So I love all the questions. Appreciate everyone putting these in. How do you make it clear to the maintenance staff that they are, so that they don't feel that they are being micromanaged? That really goes back to that organizational responsibility aspect. So the first thing that happens usually when you introduce a new process where you say that you have to fill these things out is people say, well, why do I have to do that? You don't think I'm doing my job? It's not it at all. You can say, look, it's not that I don't think you're doing your job. It's that I want to know if there are things that I can help you do your job better. This is not to micromanage you. This is to make sure that if you need resources, I have the evidence to take it back up to the boss and say, this is what we need. This is not about me making sure that you're doing your job. I know you're doing your job. I want to know if there's a way that I can help you to make it better or do it better. So really try and make sure that we have that positive spin on things, because yeah, that's the last thing that we want to do, is make this a way for people to be micromanaged. It shouldn't be that way. So yeah, keep relating it back up the chain of command there. Know that, today might have not have been, anything super crazy groundbreaking or anything like that in terms of what you need to do, and a lot of that is on purpose, right? Improving your process, making sure that you're maintaining a good CMS does not have to be rocket scientist, or it does not have to be rocket science. So making sure that you're going through those data audits, making sure you have the right data, making sure that people are trained, making sure that you're retraining them, making sure you have good metrics and not just metrics for the sake of metrics. Those are very simple things that it doesn't matter how big or small your organization is or what you are doing. If you are doing those things correctly, you will have a good best-in-class CMMS system. So appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much.